All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Dr. Rick Norton.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. The last thing I'll say about myself is I've been part of every one of our Women, Peace, and Security conferences since they were first initiated, and that's something that I put on my CV. Today, you are privileged to witness a roundtable discussion or a fireside chat between four extraordinary leaders. Although their bios are in the program, let me take a few minutes to talk about them. On my far right is Ms. Avery Alpha from the Department of Homeland Security. She is the Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis. She has worked for almost all of her time is an intelligence officer, including duty with the CIA and the National Security Council, and was an FSO in the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. It's a rich and varied background. Next to her is Ms. Katrina Fotovat from the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues in the Department of State. She has spent more than 20 years and with associate experience advocating gender and human rights globally, specifically in conflict and post-conflict settings, which is part of the War College charter, is how do we end wars. Next, Vice Admiral Sara Joyner. I could read forever about her accomplishments. She graduated from the Academy in '89 with a bachelor in oceanography. She became an aviator. She's flown from squadrons as diverse as VC-8 from Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico, to the gunfighters of VFA 105. She has commanded Carrier Air Wing 3 and Strike Group 2. She's deployed aboard Nimitz, Stennis, and Truman, some of which I was in the Navy to actually do plane guard for, which is a different story. She ran the Senate Office of Legislative Affairs and evidently did not screw up, because after that, they made her the Chief of Legislative Affairs, which gives her a unique perspective on the combination of the military and Congress. She is now the Director of Force Structure, Resources, and Assessment, J8 on the Joint Staff. And since she is an aviator, it would be inexcusable for me not to mention that she has more than 3,700 flight hours. I don't have how many traps, but I'm sure the Admiral could share that if she wanted to. And then we have Surgeon Vice Admiral Arti Sarin of the Indian Armed Forces Medical Service. Highly decorated, highly distinguished. Vice Admiral Sarin, I knew I would do that, is now the Director General of the Indian Armed Forces Medical Services, the senior most appointment in the Armed Forces Medical Service. She is also the first woman to serve in this capacity and the highest ranking woman in the history of the Indian Armed Forces. She has served in all three branches. She has served at one time or another in all three branches, and she is an expert in gamma knife surgery, which involves no knives, but it has almost a science fiction look to it. So I'd like you to welcome all of our panelist members. Vice Admiral Sarin will ask the first question of her fellow panelists.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. The first question to my panelists would be that women are still largely underrepresented in the defense security sector institutions, and even more so in leadership roles. So could we discuss the challenges that one overcame and the opportunities that one seized during this? And do you think that the journey is getting easier and more travel for women today? And if so, why or why not? Would you like to take that?
I'll go ahead and start. So, certainly when I started, it was pre-law changed, pre-1993 for women in combat, which pretty much makes you a second-class citizen when you serve in an institution that is all about warfighting. That's their main job. You can serve on the periphery, but it was a difficult time to serve fully. And so pre-1993 is sort of a line in many ways that we recognize as when the world changed somewhat. Prior to that, we were able to fly and do things on the support side. I started off as an adversary pilot, flying out of the Philippines and Puerto Rico. Great jobs, by the way. I was not suffering. But at the same time, not being able to serve fully was a very difficult situation because you were always trying to prove yourself as you went through. And there were, I would say that the huge difference about when I first joined the military is people were very willing to walk up to you and say, I don't think you belong here. And had some very robust conversations. I'd like to think that I changed a few minds along the way, but I think what made the biggest difference was that opportunity to serve fully in whatever capacity you could within the military. So as the laws changed, doors opened, and then the military is inherently a show-me organization. If you can't show people your competency, if you can't demonstrate that you have professional knowledge, and you can't fully explore the capabilities and the furthest reaches of what your specialty is, then you're not going to be able to probably stay within the organization for very long. And then I think that overall really pushes you to demonstrate that you have the prerequisite knowledge, but also its opportunity. And so that change that we had, while the beginning was pretty rough sometimes, and those conversations sometimes got pretty rowdy, I think all in all, what wins out over time is the capacity to serve fully and to demonstrate competency, and I think that's regardless of gender. But we had a barrier that was very specific that had to be removed in order for that to happen. So in my case, that really is something that changed as we went. I think for today, as we look at what do we see for today's service, I think there's some goods and others. The goods is that those barriers have been removed. Women are in submarines. If they can qualify, they can go into special forces. They force multiply because they can access places within the military that men otherwise may not be able to access, as we showed many times in the Middle East. That they were able to gain information, make connections, and relate to people that otherwise would be inaccessible to the male counterparts. I think what the difficult part of today is that largely those conversations that I thought were really difficult early on don't happen. They're pretty much driven underground. So if you want to have a robust conversation right now, you hide behind a pseudonym on a website somewhere and you express your opinion. I think that that's a loss for our nation. I think the ability to actually express how you feel in a way that doesn't wreck your life, that's a loss for our country. You don't always like it. You need to do it in respectful ways. The dialogue and the dissertation that you enjoy in an academic environment where you can disagree in a way that's constructive, that you each walk away learning something, I think we've lost that. And I think that it doesn't allow people to grow because they turn away from what is the difficult thing of engaging with somebody about an uncomfortable topic, and they turn to a machine that mostly just reinforces what they think. So I think that's a difficulty that we have today. I would say that doesn't make it easier because now you don't know who your allies are. I just sat through the ally lecture, and it's a difficult situation when you're not sure who your ally is and who your adversary is, or somebody that you need to have a good, robust conversation with. So I think that makes the world a little more complex, and I do think that for unit cohesion, it's very important that you be able to have those robust conversations. So thank you. Great question.
I'll maybe build on that a little bit. So thank you, first off, for having me. It's a pleasure always to get out of DC, but also to support the Women, Peace, and Security Conference. I really appreciate that you not only take several days to focus on this in depth as a student body, but that you're also integrating it into your coursework and the way that you're viewing national security moving forward. I think it's really integral to that. Being the career officer in intelligence, I was with CIA almost 18 years before I moved over to DHS, and I focused my career on counterterrorism all across the globe. So I worked heavily with partners, and I was often the only female in the room with a senior base of male counterparts. So early on in my career, and starting when I was maybe age 25, so the U.S. intelligence community is very good about throwing young but real experts in front of our partners and elevating them credibly. But I would walk into these rooms and encounter very skeptical audiences that were kind of looked at me, one, I'm a woman, one, I'm a young woman, and two, what can you teach me that I don't already know? So I would say in terms of challenges, it's that exposure to some of these communities that aren't as used to working with all segments of society. But then I would say the opportunity is getting back to competence. I had the backing of my seniors throughout my career, and they fully put me forward as, not my boss is gonna be the speaker on this, but truly, here is our expert on this counterterrorism material, and we stand fully behind her. They took no air out of the room. It was really elevating my voice, and that gave me the opportunity to show my competence and my expertise. And truly, time after time, you would see a light bulb click for some of these partners who just didn't have women as integrated into their teams, where it all of a sudden turned, oh yeah, she does know something. Oh, she is teaching me something new. And oh, maybe, I should consider incorporating other voices. So I would hope that also led to, the lesson learned of incorporating diverse perspectives, because I think for me, it's less about seeing myself as a woman first, but truly a competent professional. And when I look at building out my teams and having useful interactions with partners and successful intelligence partnerships, it's truly about bringing all the different perspectives to the table. And that is not only through a gender lens, but just a range of experience. So from my perspective, I would say we have improved quite significantly over the years in that, of course, people are still encountering some resistance, and with some partners more than others, this is a little bit more, there's more ground to break through. But I do think that we are starting to see more diversity around the table and more inclusion, not as a token female at the table, but truly as a panel of fellow experts who are equally respected and whose points of views are all valid.
Well, first of all, I want to just say what an honor it is to be with such a distinguished panel, and what an honor it is to be here at the Naval War College. I really want to thank all of you for your service, regardless of branch or department, your interest. I think in this question in particular, we are at the moment of the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and we are all doing this review of what does it mean to actually have women, peace, and security in effect. And we are at the moment also where we have more conflicts around the world since World War II. We are at the moment when it feels like the world is on fire. And, when we've talked to women around the world, we've talked about, let's all become firefighters. That's been my call to so many women activists and so many women that we've been in touch with, so many women leaders, and they keep sending me fire trucks. So I will note, please don't send me fire trucks. One of the things that I would point out is, yesterday I think you had President Osmani here, who is literally someone that I think of when I think of women, peace, and security in action. Kosovo is the country that is the most supportive of the United States in the world. That woman faces constant threats to herself and her family on a daily basis. So when I think about women in leadership, and the other threats that are coming towards them, I think about technology-facilitated gender-based violence, how even when I was just in Canada, there are women mayors that are stepping down because their families are being threatened online, because they are facing these threats on a daily basis. And what does that mean in terms of how do we implement? What are the things that we take into consideration when we are doing gender analysis or context analysis? It really comes to what I say, nothing about them without them. So making sure that we're taking their perspectives, talk to them. I mean, whenever we engage with anyone in the military, you all are honestly our best ambassadors. You're all over the world. You're the ones that are able to engage. You're the face of the United States. And we thank you for that. But making sure to take those perspectives into consideration, I think, is vital. We are really looking at a moment when I was just listening to Commander Cole talk about strategic empathy. I was just in Brazil for the G20, and one of the things that was very interesting, they had just had a BRICS meeting right before the G20 meeting that we were having. And one of the things that they had discussed with us was how much more they trust the United States because of our emphasis on human rights, our support for gender equality. And that strategic imperative of making sure they know that's what the United States promotes in terms of our democratic principles really is something that is a national security positive aspect of what we should be pushing. That is what brings allies to us. That is how we develop these partnerships. So it's imperative that we make sure that I'm recognizing I'm sitting next to some really badass women, and I'm very humbled by this, but recognizing the representation they bring and making sure to highlight that, regardless of what country it comes from, making sure that they know they have a support system when the United States is out there. We are here to support you. We are here to work with you. We are here to partner with you, whether it be in NATO or elsewhere. I was also in Moldova recently, and one of the interesting things that I found in Moldova, their Ministry of Interior had put up border guards at almost 50% women. So when the war happened in Ukraine, all these women and children came across the border. There were so many women there to help them. These are women that had been subjected to conflict-related sexual violence. They were traumatized, but by having women there that were trained on trauma and survivor support efforts, those women had someplace to go, and they were gathering so much information from them. They were helping them. They were able to thwart things like sexual exploitation. So making sure that we have that gender balance and that gender leadership is absolutely imperative from a national security perspective. That is something that is often a blind spot, as we know, certainly in the IC as well as in the diplomatic fields. The bad guys know. The authoritarian playbook, they know when we don't have our eyes on the ball. They know they will go and make sure that they are recruiting. We were just in Colombia. In Colombia, the numbers of women that the drug cartels are recruiting has increased 400%. 400% for women. Now you ask why women? Because they're not paying attention to the women being recruited. So when it's a blind spot, it's a blind spot and a severe risk to our national security. We want to make sure that we're looking at this from an effectiveness perspective. So we have national security efforts, making sure we're looking at that global strategic comparative advantage, and then making sure that we're making sure to promote the preparedness of our country in terms of making sure to include women across the military. So from a leadership perspective, I thank you all again for allowing me to be on this panel today. And I thank you all for making sure to include women, peace, and security in the work that you do, because it's not just about women. It really is about our national security.
I would just like to add that, the last part of the question, whether the journey was made easier, I would just like to acknowledge all our senior leaders, from the 50s who have set the stage for us. You've gone through many, difficulties to break the glass ceilings, to be the first, and for us to follow in their footsteps. So I'd like to really thank each and everyone in each and every country that, who has been there. And I would like to say that the Army Medical Corps in India started in 1950. It is, I think, the single most gender-neutral platform that you can get, and I was lucky enough to step on it and be here. So you have an equal opportunity because everything is on your academic, prowess and competence, like you said. So you have promotions and then you have opportunity. One opportunity I would like to mention in the same context is when I was a lieutenant commander and I was, deployed in Kashmir. to look after the women in Kashmir, because all the civilian doctors had, moved away in keeping the security situation in mind. So I went there, and I was there for 4 months. So that was an opportunity which changed me for a lifetime. And the best part of my male colleagues who there was, I didn't have to undergo what you did. I had a very, very pleasant time. And the commanding officer actually, the Navy sent a chaperone. They sent a chaperone from base hospital to Srinagar to look after me or to be with me. And 3 days into her coming there, the commanding officer told me, "I don't think you need a chaperone, ma'am." And I thought that was a compliment. And also his point of view was, I think, very good. We've had some excellent male mentors who have taught us leadership and to move ahead. So I would just like to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for getting us started. It was a great question. Do I have a volunteer to ask the second? And if no one volunteers, I'll be happy.
Go down the line.
There we go. That's fine, Admiral. What a good idea.
There's an order to this. No.
Make it easy for you.
We need a sheepdog for this second. Please go ahead.
I would like to say that you laugh about the story about the chaperone, but when I got stranded on an aircraft carrier back in the day for a missile shoot, and they put an armed petty officer outside my door. And he had to escort me to the bathroom, the head and back each time. So this is not that far along. That with the U.S. military is maybe only a bit farther along this road. And if you go back in history, but it's great to acknowledge those who came before. What I was really interested, because we have a very diverse background panel, was really as we look at leadership and what encapsulates leadership, and you as a woman, as a female leader within your own areas of expertise, what do you see as working well in your leadership technique, and what do you see as cultural biases and boundaries that sort of limit or have you modify or maybe reconsider some of your what would be more natural leadership instincts that you have? Do you feel constrained by culture as you as a female leader?
I'll kick it off. I think from the diplomatic perspective, we are trained very much to look at what other perspectives are, what are the intentions behind another person's efforts, and to meet them where they are, use their language, make sure that they understand what we're saying from, the perspective of here's why this is important to you. So I'll use the women's economic empowerment perspective to kind of give you a guide. After COVID, actually, what was very interesting is one of the things that really happened was a lot of companies came to us and said, we've lost so many women, and it's hitting our bottom line. We need to make sure that we're finding ways to recruit women back into the work that we're doing. So I was actually talking to the Vice Admiral about the work that we had done in India with Google. Google was just, they were saying, we really want the women back. They are consistent. They're here every day. We want to make sure that they are, coming back and bringing their skills and their expertise. How do we do this? So the data was there. I know that you all have been Dr. Hudson, so I won't give you all that data. But certainly the private sector understands the absolute importance of making sure to have gender equity and equality, because it really is about making sure that they are the most effective they can be. And so making sure to bring that and that kind of perspective of how do we integrate this into the culture of whatever we're working on? How do we make sure the IT professionals recognize the expertise of, the Google women that are coming back in? So bringing that kind of like, what is the incentive that is necessary for others to be able to provide that kind of dialogue that, I've been sitting here, Jordan Penland, who is our naval officer, our MILAD in our office, has been translating all of the acronyms that DOD uses that State Department doesn't, and vice versa, which has been very helpful. But it's really important for us to be able to speak each other's languages, and that goes across sectors, and that goes across levels. So finding that common language, commonality, really has been very helpful in making sure that we're getting that perspective in there. The other piece is storytelling. You know, we have found it it's one thing for Kat to come up to you and say, like, here's what's happening in Afghanistan with women who are facing, you know, gender persecution there. It's another thing for me to bring you to, you know, a woman that actually was facing gender persecution so she can tell you herself what is happening. We've been doing that in places like Sudan. We've brought in Sudanese women actually to mediations to make sure that they are explaining, here's the impact of how you are doing this humanitarian assistance. Here's what works better. If you've engaged with any Ukrainian women, I call them the wolf pack. They can tell you exactly what is happening on the ground. They can tell you what bullets help or not. I mean, they will literally tell you how they are facing issues on a local level in a way that really affects how we are actually able to implement our work as well. So I think one of the efforts is really bringing in the voices of the people that are being the most affected. Again, we say nothing about them without them, but it's really important to make sure those voices are being heard.
So I think when we're talking about leadership styles and a female lens, there are some assumptions at play, right? You hear a lot about how women leaders are softer, friendlier, more focused on consensus building. And I would just say I probably do not align with all of those. So, you know, to be an authentic leader, I think is most important first and foremost. And, you know, my team will say I'm very results driven. Very focused on excellence. And I, of course, want everyone's input and I want to bring them along with me, but I'm not going to sacrifice quality for consensus. So I would say first and foremost, you know, myth bust a little bit. Like, we are all different individuals. The fact that we're all women doesn't mean we all have the same leadership style. And I think it's healthy to break that assumption. I do think as women, we navigate imposter syndrome a little bit more. I can't tell you how many times I get that question when I'm working with women leaders, I'm trying to grow in my organization or having other outside engagements. And I try to say that is entirely healthy. I am very comfortable. I have dealt with it myself. I am very comfortable with you dealing with it. I think it is part of your journey. And I think sometimes women feel a little bit less comfort in taking those stretch positions. And I think it's totally healthy to dive into that and grow into the job. And it perhaps shouldn't be seen as imposter syndrome so much as an opportunity for a little bit of healthy discomfort, and that, you know, the rest of us, your leadership team, whether female or male, are there to help you develop in that direction. So I would say I probably have less of a gender lens on leadership and just more of a growing up as an Intel professional, what I appreciated most from my leaders, or where I thought I would have appreciated something different, I've kind of molded into my own mix of how I want to grow and lead my team.
Just to add to that, you know, leadership styles are individual, I would say, and female leadership in, you know, military environments is a subject that is very contested, is very, very complex and incompletely understood. I think there's a wide variation here, and every person is unique, but what Dr. Sara said yesterday is important. You know, the EQ, I think we do have a little EQ. We utilize that in many ways in our leadership styles. I like to look at the collective genius of my juniors. And that's a poem I talk to myself about, and I function a lot with that. Of course, women multitask. We have to be given that credit. We are naturally talented at that, so that is there. We're definitely more, I use a very inclusive policy. I keep revising my HR policies. I try to keep my ears to the ground, be hands-on, and I think finally, communication is the key in any leadership style. Yeah.
Ms. Fotovat, you're next.
I'll go next. Okay, my question, and I've asked this question actually of a lot of women leaders around the world, and it's an interesting finding, but I'm not going to tell you until I hear everybody's answer to this. I've asked Malala, you name it, I've asked them all. So my question actually is, when was the first time you felt empowered in your career, and who was it that empowered you? And what kind of advice would you give to future leaders about empowerment? When was the first time you felt empowered in your career, and who was it that empowered you? And what kind of advice would you give to other future women leaders?
So I'll start in line. So going back to the story I shared with you at the beginning, I was empowered very early on with some of these partners to be that, 25-year-old blonde, blue-eyed youngster who actually held the room amongst very senior generals from partner nations. And I was empowered in that because my leadership walked me in without any question and just turned the room over to me and said, provide your expertise. And their trust in my ability to do that really, shaped the course of my career. And made me feel like I had a great impact early on, and that I could really be heard even when you have a skeptical audience. So the lesson learned for me, in growing my own teams and elevating them is to really set the scene. If you show from the way that you engage with your counterparts that you have utmost confidence in lifting up the person with the best substance and the best expertise on your team, no matter what they look like, what age they are, what background they come from, I think that focuses all of us on the right thing, which is the expertise and the perspectives being shared around the table and not getting lost in, other aspects. So I think that is the best thing we can do as leaders for our team, really setting the stage and ensuring that they have our support throughout the engagement to either step in, to, get rid of any kind of inappropriate stray voltage, or to ensure that their message is being reinforced and heard. Who was it? Oh, who was it? So it was my first line manager. I mean, it was really, I think we have built a really positive culture in the U.S. intelligence community where that expertise is valued, and it's throughout the ranks. So it's the expectation that it doesn't have to be, the head of your intelligence service. It is expected through the management ranks that you value expertise over everything, and you don't suck the air out of the room. You lift up your expert to be sitting at the table in the prime seat instead of, the one feeding you the cards to be the mouthpiece.
Well, to begin with, I mean, you're talking about leaders who empowered us? Yeah, because otherwise we have so many other people who would have before that. But as leaders, yes, I remember my commanding officer, when I was a lieutenant commander and we had the Gujarat earthquake, and he said, you have to look after this ward. There were about 25 people, and I thought that was the first time I felt so responsible that, he trusted me with the responsibility, and there was so much of media and so many things that one had to deal with. It was the first time, and then there were many others all along the way. And I would say when I went to become an oncologist, there was Dr. Katrina Dinshaw. She was the director of the Tata Memorial Hospital and is now a sister institution of the MD Anderson. What she's done for cancer care in India is something, to be remembered, and she's no more. But I would definitely give her a lot of credit for empowering me in, specializing in so many things and looking after and administering things, not only doing your professional work as a specialist, but even looking after the administration of your hospital and other things. So, and there have been several others. The Indian Navy has empowered me so much. All the leaders, all the senior officers, everybody's been empowering me. So that's how it is. I look at it that way.
Admiral? I'm not cutting you off.
I'm going to tell a flying story because, for those of you, and don't pick on me for this flying story, because I was a very young lieutenant.
We're waiting.
I know. I was like, so I would say empowerment's been a journey because the way we structure the military, it allows us to meet goals incrementally along the way. And so I think empowerment is actually the journey of growth as an officer in our military. It allows you to build that confidence and that expertise that underpins empowerment, I think, as an individual. And we all get to experience that as we go forward if we're lucky in our careers. But a really early example for me is I talk about how back in the day it was. So I'll give you a back in the day story is I was a A4 pilot, as I talked about, and I was an adversary pilot and doing pretty well. I felt pretty good about it, but the one thing my commanding officer would not let me be was a functional check pilot, FCF pilot, somebody who actually tests the aircraft through every regime. And it wasn't because I couldn't prove to him what I knew about the aircraft. He wasn't questioning my ability, my professional knowledge. He was really questioning my judgment combined with my physical strength. And so, like I said, we had very robust conversations that would happen, and we had gone back and forth as I asked to be a functional check pilot. I had the right number of hours, I had the right experiences, and he was like, no. And so finally we get in, and we are in a O Club, of course, because that's where all good things happen in naval aviation. And maybe we had a beer or two as we did it, but go in there, and I walked into the thing and held up a weight. And I was like, I'm strong enough to do this, sir, I can do this. And I was holding that weight, and he's like, put that damn thing down. But from there, we had a conversation, and it came out that he was worried. And one of the things with an A4, we disconnected the flight controls. So if you went beyond 30 degrees of angle of bank, the aircraft you were flying with cables, and the pressure on the flight surfaces got so heavy that you couldn't control the aircraft. And I said, sir, it's not just about strength, it's about judgment, about not going beyond a certain, and understanding the limitations of the aircraft and really building that expertise. And through a series of conversations during that time, he finally said, okay, you could go into the training pipeline and you can do this. And I got a ton of functional check flights behind me. I managed not to exceed the angle of bank and to land an A4 disconnected from flight controls, it is pretty difficult, but if you obey the rules, it works out. But I think that was an empowerment of coming over and having somebody actually, I talk about not having dialogues. That was an example of having a dialogue which led somewhere where we could understand each other, develop common ground, and sort of put a rule set of what he was worried about and what I wanted to do, and we were able to work our way through that. And he respected me as a pilot. And as a naval aviator, which really meant a lot to me. So it was a very empowering event. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
So I just wanted to note that whenever I ask this question, one of the fascinating things that happens is how many women talk about how many men have empowered them, and how that has really set the stage for a lot of their careers, a lot of their success. Partnership, I think, has been fascinating to see across the board, and it's an overwhelming number. So, and the other piece of it is making sure that we're all looking at our own inherent biases. The minute I interact with a lawyer who's a Peace Corps volunteer that works on human rights, I'm like, they're like me. But being able to overlook that and make sure you're looking at what is the potential? How do I support this person? How do I help them achieve success? Because the success for them is success for everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Alpha?
All right, so we've talked a little bit about all of the progress that we've made over the years in integrating women into leadership roles in national security, but clearly we're not quite there yet, right? We don't have 50-50 representation. So my question for the panel is, what do you think we still need to work on, and how can we get to that purely equitable 50-50 ratio?
I'll take that. Yeah, so, female inclusion, we've talked enough about all of that, so we'll go straight to the point that, amongst the international community, we have found that stronger participation of women in, the defense sector is definitely there, and it's standing out with their commitment to the fact that this has to be done through changes in mindset and policy towards a diverse and inclusive analysis, participation of women in the defense sector. So it has to be a top-down structural change. It's a challenge, and the perception of the male-based combatant is slowly moving out. I think so. And Australia is one nation which has enhanced this objective very well with a national action plan on it to support gender neutrality in choosing the best person for the best job. Also keeping in mind gender equality for the numbers. Like we are looking at numbers, but we can only escalate numbers gradually. There's no point in recruiting when you cannot retain. So you need to have the infrastructure and the mindset before we go for that. So they have now come to a situation where they have equal participation in combat. They have a national policy on women employment. They have removed gender-based restrictions, and that happens, I think, because of their national policy. In 2013, Australian women were directly able to transfer to combat positions, and in 2016, combat positions were available to all of them who kind of recruited initially. They were given equal opportunity, and I love the terms that were used in their national action policy. It said to have an atmosphere of mutual respect, accountability, and credibility. And they have a law which is called CEDAW, and it's significant, and it protects the women joining the defense forces, and it doesn't allow the defense forces to revert on this policy. So it's sealed now, the numbers that are sealed, and they have improved leadership. They actually researched 30,000 women, they interviewed 30,000 Australian Defence Force members, and they found what were the issues. They had some 21 recommendations out of them. Recruitment and retention were the main ones. The prevention of sexual harassment, which was discussed yesterday, is a point, and improving of leadership opportunities were there, and to improve the diverse working employment, to give a lot of issues like, looking after children, childcare, parenting leave, postings for couples, and so all of that the Australian service has developed, and they have now, each service, actually the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force have got their own plans, which they call Pathway to Change, and under an umbrella of a total workforce model, and their aim is that by 2024 and latest by 27, specific targets of 25% women in the Navy and the Air Force and 15% in the Army. And there are several other countries which are also on the same net, like Germany, like the UK, and Japan. Japan has also taken on very, very clear-cut policies. They are intending to reach a 10% figure, very clear-cut standard operating procedures, how to look after couples and women and all the issues which they have with childcare, which seems to be the stumbling block for people doing well, then coming to the childcare rearing age, and then not being able to get into leadership positions. So all these countries, I can name, there were so many that Dr. Valerie yesterday in her outstanding presentation showed percentages. People ask, it is slowly rising. And my own country, I would again be very proud to say that India, at the moment, in my particular branch, we are actually in leadership position, the topmost. We are 75%. I am the Director General of Armed Forces Medical Services. The DGMS Army and the Navy are also women. So we only have the DGMS Air Force, so he's 25% and we are 75%. So this is a once in a lifetime situation. I think because time and place, it may not happen again, but that's the kind of opportunity, like I mentioned to you, that it was a very easy platform. So there are countries, even in South America, in Africa, under a lot of NGO covers, they are looking at all these childcare and child support plans to be able to have women, more women get recruited and move into leadership positions, and to move from single-digit percentages into double.
Really, really good discussion there. I was struck by Brigadier General Tracy when he was talking about child development centers and things like that. I know, we go, what does that have to do with the military? But that empowers men and women. We have as many men that are taking care of children today as we have women. And I said for the family structure, part of what he was speaking to was the need to maintain the family structure and to support it in a way that's coherent with your lifestyle. And I think we're on a road. I think that's one of the areas where we're on a road that is very supportive of men and women's service writ large, of the family unit, of allowing service and family not to come in conflict with one another. As far as an equal number requires at least an equal propensity. I don't think we have an equal propensity within the United States for women who want to serve. I go all around talking with young women, and they always go, not me. And I'm like, what's the look at the floor and turn your head? It's, they'll go, that's really great, and I'm really proud of you, but not me. And that's a cultural thing. They have self-selected themselves away from it early for various reasons, and I'm not gonna necessarily question. What we wanna do is take away the reasons that don't make sense, right? If that's what they really want to do, I go talk to little girls and I go, you could be a ballerina or you could be a fighter pilot. It's okay. Trying to propensate them early to get it in their head that there's a spectrum of what they want to do. Because at the end of the day, we want the largest population to come in, and then we want to select the best and brightest out of that large population. And if you don't get the population to come through the door, you can't get the best and brightest. So as we look at this, and I was at the Naval Academy back in the day, I was part of the women's glee club. You do not want to hear me sing, all right? We were bringing in less than 1,000, and it just wasn't, you know, it was less than 100. We're actually graduating. We were bringing over a little over 100. The class size was about 1,300 because they were going over 1,000 trying to bring in enough women to trip over the line. But the density of that population caused me to be able to go and travel extensively with the Glee Club with not so good of a voice. That's not the goal we're looking for. So what I would say is you gotta get them through the door, and we have to understand what is stopping them. You know, it's service, so it's hard, right? You're gonna chew glass. There's gonna be times where you're away from your family. Happens to men and women all the time. And we don't wanna be apologetic for that. That's just part of who we are. And we need people to understand that when they join, because I want to keep them. I want to do my best to take care of them and their families. I need to understand what their issues are and if I can resolve them. But if it's a lack of coherence with service, with the service itself, the demands of the service, I can't help that, right? And that's going to yield a population that more or less reflects who is most propense to walk through the door. And then out of that crowd, we got to level the playing field as far as opportunity. One of the things they did when I was flying in naval aviation is they created a training program, the SFWT program, Strike Fighter Weapons Training. And so they started that, and what that did is it took it away from, you know, Goose and Maverick getting the inside line on how to dogfight, and they took it to a very rigorous, standardized training system where you all got exposed to the same things, and at the end of the day, you either rose to the top or you didn't. You could either perform or you could not, and there was grading. Was there bias in grading? Absolutely. You know, there's bias in everything, but at least it took the steps to create that level playing field. I think that's what we need to concentrate on. We need to concentrate on propensity, and we need to not be apologetic about what the service demands, but we need to try to make it as coherent as we can with how they live. Thank you.
Just wanted to add that I think worldwide there are studies to prove it that most of the youth doesn't know much about the military, like what the Admiral just said. You know, the increasing awareness has to be a little more, and it has to be, I think, done by the military leaderships. At the moment, I'm trying to do that back home because we're going to have a recruitment in February. So we are looking at ways and means of getting the word down, because when I go to lecture at colleges, they say, we want to join. But I said, don't you know? And many of them do not know. So the aim, like you said, you know, to evolve and incorporate all the talents and demographics is very important. Would you like to say?
Well, I think, first of all, you guys are so cool. Like, I want to join the military just because I think representation makes a huge difference. You know, I'm thinking of my son when he was like 10. It was when Clinton had left, Secretary Clinton had left, and Secretary Kerry was taking over, and they have Take Your Kid to Work Day. And so I had taken him Take Your Kid to Work Day. And it was taking a little while for Secretary Kerry to come out. And finally he comes out, and my son was like, Secretary Kerry's a man? And I was like, he's a man. And he was like, I thought you had to be a woman to be Secretary of State. And I said, no, thank God Kerry had a dog, because then that sold him a little better. He has a dog called Ben the Diplomat that came out and entertained all the kids. But it was interesting how that representation, like literally, like that's all he knew was, you know, the Secretary of State was a woman. And he hadn't even thought about the possibility of Secretary of State being a man, but how important that representation was. And again, just how cool you are, that I think that's a huge piece of it. And then, looking at the challenges and barriers, certainly childcare and those issues, making sure that we are looking internally as, what does it mean actually to have 50%? We want to make sure we have the best people for positions. And that also includes looking internally at what does that even mean? What are the gaps that are missing? How are we not, making sure that we're taking advantage of the expertise of the entire United States, population to make sure that we're looking at the best and the brightest to serve this country. So I think we also have to do our internal analysis of what that actually means to make sure we're fitting those perspectives. I know Romania at one point had put in a test for their foreign service officers, and they had kind of rejiggered it, and only the women were passing. They had to actually change the test. So again, I think, and again, that's too far on one side or the other. We really need to figure out what it is are those gaps that we're missing to make sure that we're hitting the needs of the country, the needs of our national security in a way that really helps fulfill those objectives.
So for our perspective from the civilian intel community side of things, our challenge is less on the recruitment side and more on the elevation into more senior ranks. And, of course, parenting can come into play with that. But I think it's a huge opportunity for us to invest in mentoring and developing our officers. And that's not, women at the cost of men. It's just to really fill those gaps when we're looking at our 14, 15 SES ranks on the civilian side. I think for all of us to have the best legacy we could have, it's less in the programmatic deliverables that we leave on the table. I think we've all learned at this point in our career, no matter what role you have, you're very replaceable. But I think the legacy that we can really have for the best of our organizations is developing that next generation and then instilling in them an interest in developing the one after them. And that's how we, for the long haul, really strengthen the senior leadership ranks to be more representative.
For your questions, and even more so for your answers. One of the prerogatives of the moderator is to get to sum up. I would say there's an old saying that leadership devolves upon communication, character, and competence. I think before you see competence so tight, so sharp, you could slice yourself with it. Character that speaks for itself, and clearly superior communications across the panel. Thank you for being part of us. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, what a great panel.